Armenians are in rebellion. Some of these are sequential, some of these are simultaneous, but this goes on for 30 years. And what happens is we have to understand the military response. How do they deal with counterinsurgency? They send in armies. They send in 20,000 people. If that's not enough, they'll send in 40,000 more. They might send in 100,000, and they'll stamp it out. So the Ottoman response to insurgency is to send in the army. It's almost a reflexive action. They're spring-loaded to do it. That's how they do it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. In the middle of this is a new form of rebellion, and it's called insurgency by committee. It's a signature of the age. It's anarchists and nihilists in places like Russia and Italy. And the committees start in the Balkans. And these are small groups of people. It's not a popular uprising. It's not France in 1789. It's not the United States in 1776. These are small groups of highly motivated, dedicated people, much like Al-Qaeda today. The two that are of most concern for the Ottomans are the IMRO, the Macedonian committees, seeking to liberate what's now Bulgaria, Macedonia, and lower Serbia, Kosovo, that area, and the Armenian Revolutionary Federation. So these are committees. How would you describe a committee? They're heavily armed. They've got a persona. They've got an identity. The Armenian committees look like that. They like to take pictures of themselves with the bandolier thing. They look like Pancho Villa and Mexican bandits. I don't know why, but that's a very popular pose. There are hundreds of these photographs in the archives. Does it mean that the entire 1.5 million people, Armenians in the Ottoman Empire, are in this? No. This is a small group of people, but they're highly motivated. They have manifestos. The manifestos are dedicated to the idea of autonomy or independence. The manifestos, as do those of the nihilists and the anarchists, the Black Hand, for example, that takes down the Archduke on June 28, 1914, is such an organization. It's a Serbian committee operating inside the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They use violence for political means. This is a terrorist agenda. We're going to force the hand of the ruling class by implementing a terrorist event that will cause an overreaction, thus bringing in the great powers. It's a calculated act. So they have manifestos. They're Marxist socialists initially. They'll morph a little bit more towards socialism. They'll drop the Marxism, but they retain the violent terroristic act, what they call the propaganda by deed in the manifestos, as the operative motif for how they're going to achieve independence. They're cellular. Don't look at the diagram so much as think of Al-Qaeda. Think of small cells, 5 or 6 people here. They don't know who the 5 or 6 people are in the next village over because they're compartmentalized by design. They respond to an architecture of control. There is a legal wing of the committees that's activist and much like Hamas today that helps communities. And then there's the secret armed terrorist wing. So Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, these are not new organizations institutionally. They've existed for 100 years. They're hard to deal with. They're almost impossible to root out. They smuggle arms. The Armenian Revolutionary Committees have extensive networks in the diaspora, in France, United States. They have fund drives, they raise money, they buy weapons. Europe is awash in weapons at this time. There have been a number of wars. It's not unlike the Middle East today. You can go out and you can buy 100 rifles, no problem. And then they're smuggled in. So over a 20-year period, the committees in Macedonia and in the eastern provinces, Armenians, pardon me, I've got a nagging chest cold, smuggling lots of weapons, thousands, 5,000 rifles, for example. Bombs, bomb-making material, propaganda, printing presses. Bring in printing presses to print manifestos and handouts and flyers. So this is going on. That's what they look like. I don't know where this group comes from. I think Van, and I say that because we know that the committee in Van was heavily armed with Mauser pistols. And what these boys are holding are Mauser pistols. It's not an AK-47, but it's kind of the 1909, 1914 equivalent thereof. It's a semi-automatic pistol. You can put a stock on it. You can convert it into almost like a carbine. Now, those aren't peasants. Those are intelligentsia. Those are businessmen. Those are local leaders, teachers, shop owners, and they're urban. They're literate. They read and write. They've got a literature. The Armenians have a vast literature by this time. They're educated. They're like the Jews in the Ottoman Empire. They're one of a couple millions, a couple communities that are very heavily educated, and they're urban people. This is an advantage for them. That they can organize. They're cooperative. They're not peasants. I just throw it up because nobody's smiling. I don't know why, but they're grim. They're dedicated. I mean, those are serious people. Okay, in a nutshell, this is my view of the Armenian committees. They're well organized. They're heavily armed. They're politically indoctrinated. They are committed to violence. Doctrinally, they've got manifestos. They're willing to use any means necessary. They've got a lot of support outside. They smuggle in stuff. The leadership includes highly educated intelligentsia, community leaders. Now, where I've changed my view is I've come to understand it's not a lot of people. Membership is limited. We're not talking thousands and thousands of people. We're talking about in a city of 20,000 people, of whom maybe 5,000 are Armenians, that there might be 15 guys who are in this. It doesn't take a lot of terrorists to cause problems. It doesn't take thousands of people to execute a terrorist operation. It takes 3 or 4 or 5 highly motivated in secret that are armed and trained and ready to do it. Most Armenians who are Ottoman citizens are loyal. They pay their taxes. They want the rule of law. They're happy with their lives, most of them. They serve in the army after 1908. So most Armenians, by far and away, the vast preponderance, maybe they're not sympathetic to the ruling party, but they're loyal citizens to the empire. So that's an important thing to remember. This is not everybody. Okay, where do they live? That's kind of where they live. The crosshatched areas are the densely populated areas in the empire. Most of them live in eastern Anatolia, the area between Erzurum, Sivas, Van, Diyarbakir, and that area, or they live over in the west in Constantinople, Izmit, Thrace, and those areas. So they're clustered. They're clustered. They're not widely distributed. The ones in the east tend to be Orthodox, and they have strong connections with the Russians. There are Protestant Armenians. There are Catholic Armenians. Those groups tend not to be so radicalized. The bulk of the people in the committees tend to be Orthodox Armenians. They have strong ties to the Catholicos in Tbilisi, the patriarch, if you will, of the Armenian church at the time, and they are heavily politicized by the Russians. Strong connections. Okay, World War I. What happens in World War I? The Ottoman army. They are widely distributed in garrisons, just like they are today, all around the empire. Every town, every city's got a garrison, regiments, divisions. They're all widely distributed, as are the armies of Germany and France and all of the European powers. When they go to war, they move from their garrisons to the frontiers. And they start the movement process to go to their war stations. So over a 4-month period, the Ottoman army goes from its garrisons to the war stations, and by November, that's where the bulk of the army is. The remaining corps are headed for Palestine or Mesopotamia. So I'm going to come back to this. This is a key idea. What used to be a mosaic covering the whole empire, soldiers, is now gone. replaced by forces on the frontiers. The same thing happens in France. The Germans do the Schlieffen Plan. The armies are moved for mobilization purposes. Okay, the armies deployed. Going into the spring of 1915. Ottoman intelligence. What does the government know? What don't they know? What do they know for a fact? They've been tracking the Armenian committees for 25 years. They've got solid intelligence on the bulk of the leaders, on the location of the cells. They know a lot about their capability and capacity, what they're armed with, how much. So they've been tracking these people. Ottoman intelligence, human intelligence, we call it today, human, is very good. They've got informers. They've got spies. The Armenians have had a number of congresses where they get together and discuss changes to manifestos, they discuss operational plans, and they discuss the way ahead in the future. There's been, the latest one has occurred in Erzurum in August of 1914, and it's split. Many of the Armenian committeemen at Erzurum want to remain loyal to the empire, but there is a substantial number of people who say this is our opportunity, and if we don't strike now, we'll never get our independence. So this is a polarized conference, and there's a very vigorous, vehement wing of the committees who demand action. Europe's gone to war, and this is our chance. There's a number, thousands of Armenians who after the Erzurum conference, go to Russia and form regiments of Armenians called druzinis. So these are volunteer regiments, kind of on the scale of the Islamic State. They're not with black flags and bandanas, but they form themselves into volunteer regiments, and they train. The Russians give them weapons, and they're ready to go. They're poised, they're spring-loaded to come back and attack the Ottoman Empire. There's a quasi-war on the northeastern frontier. There are guerrilla actions going on up there all the time. There are massacres, there are kidnappings on both sides. Armenian committeemen are kidnapping Muslim Turks. The special organization, Enver's special forces guys, are kidnapping and massacring Armenians. And it's going on before the war starts for the Ottomans. It's escalating. It's getting worse and worse and worse. And all the reports from the Foreign Ministry, the Ministry of Defense, pour into Constantinople, where the staff reads them. And there is a certain amount, as we're seeing today, of threat fever. ISIS today, the Islamic State, is it a threat or not? It's presented as an escalating threat. We don't, your guess is as good as mine if that intelligence is real or not. They believe it in Constantinople. The British and the French are about to invade the Dardanelles, and they know this. The Ottoman they've got spies in Cairo, they've got spies on Cyprus, and they know the British are coming to Gallipoli. That's right around the corner. That bothers them. The key piece of this isn't the military deployments. It really isn't the activities of the committee. It's the vulnerability of the logistics net. So the last piece of this is they are acutely aware, and the Ottoman staffs, of how vulnerable the armies are on the forward frontiers logistically. Okay. We're going to look at the Third Army. The Third Army is the one that's up there on the Russian frontier. And if you look at the road networks, they go back from the Russian frontier all the way back down to Adana, where they hook into the railroad and they go to Constantinople. The Army needs, on a continuing basis, food, ammunition, fuel, medical supplies. It needs replacement soldiers. There's a pipeline that keeps that Army in being. The Army has maybe 15, 30 days of supplies. After that, it starves. So to keep 300,000 men on the frontier as soldiers, you've got to supply them. So the lines of communication are critical. If you cut those, interdict those, the Army, after 15, 20 days, starts to starve. Let me go back. The Armenian communities lie directly on these lines of communications. So the Armenian communities, these aren't exclusively Armenian towns, but there are numbers of Armenians living in places like Erzurum, Konya, Sivas, that are right on these right on the roads. Starting in February, March, and going into April, there are increasing numbers of interdictions on the roads. Bridges blowing up, railways, or not railways, but telegraph lines cut, supply parties interdicted and massacred, the stoppage of supplies, and these things are going on all over. We're not talking thousands and thousands of people in rebellion. We're talking about select, kind of like Lawrence of Arabia. If you remember that movie, knocking out the railway and then fleeing into the interior, what that does is to stop the railway for a week until they fix it. So this is that kind of an activity, and there are a lot of it, and the archives are full of this stuff, not just the Turkish archives, but the German archives as well, reports of what's happening out there in eastern Anatolia, and there are escalating amounts. It's getting worse as we go from February and March into April of 1915. The one that is most important